He thought time was his ally, that tomorrow would always be there, that he could postpone conversations, meetings, love. But time isn't infinite. It leaves and never comes back. We all think, I'll make it in time. And if you think you have time, look around. It's leaving right now. He always said, I'm fine, even when the cough wouldn't go away for weeks, even when the pain in his side started keeping him awake at night, even when the mirror showed a face he no longer recognized as his own. It's nothing. Just caught a cold. I'll sleep it off. He thought he had time, but time had already run out. One click and you're with us, together until we hit our first 1,000. He'd get up in the morning, drink strong coffee, check his email, and pretend nothing was happening. He'd work late, laugh with his coworkers, but at night, he'd lie there listening to his heart beating in his temples. Too fast, too loud. I'm just overworked. Need to rest. But rest kept getting postponed, just like going to the doctor. After all, that would just be a waste of time. What could they possibly say? Take some vitamins? One day he woke up feeling like the air had thickened, as if each breath couldn't quite reach the bottom of his lungs. He sat up in bed, picked up his phone, dialed the clinic, deleted it, closed his eyes. Later. People think illnesses come suddenly, that there's yesterday I was healthy, and today it's all over. But the truth is, they creep up on you, quietly, persistently, without knocking. A week later, he couldn't make it to the 4th floor without stopping. But instead of making an appointment, he bought new running shoes. It's all because I don't move enough. Once I start jogging, everything will be fine. He wore them once, and never made it past the front door. That evening, he sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and noticed for the first time, his hand was shaking. Just slightly, he shrugged. I'm tired. Sometimes we direct our own tragedy, not because of fate, but because we're afraid to read the first act to the end. The morning was ordinary, almost too ordinary. Kettle toast, traffic jam. Only one thing, wouldn't let him take a full breath, as if someone had put an invisible lock on his lungs. He told himself again, it'll pass. I'm just tired. But this time the voice inside added, what if it doesn't? He walked into the office, sat at his computer, and for the first time in his life felt like the keys were somehow heavier than usual. Every keystroke echoed with a pulling pain in his wrist. A coworker joked, "What, are you getting old?" He brushed it off. But inside, that phrase stuck. At lunch, he went to the pharmacy. Not to the hospital, to the pharmacy. Something for immunity, he told the pharmacist. Fatigue, weakness. She looked at him carefully. You know, young man, you don't need vitamins. You need to see a doctor. He smirked. Yeah, right, of course. A doctor. I'll get around to it. That evening, he stopped by his mother's. She looked at him and frowned. You've lost weight? Well, that's good. Number, that's not good. Her voice was unusually firm. Go tomorrow. Promise me. He wanted to make a joke, but there was no room for jokes in her gaze. Okay, he exhaled. Tomorrow. The next day, he sat in the clinic. The smell of antiseptic, pale walls, a line where everyone scrolled through their phones, avoiding eye contact. When they called his name, he walked into the office. The doctor, a dry, tired man about 50 years old. What's bothering you? Weakness, shortness of breath, sometimes pain in my side, but it's probably from sitting at a desk all day. Do you smoke? Number almost never, sometimes. The doctor wrote silently, then looked him straight in the eyes. Have you had any blood work done? Number, why would I, if... Get it done. Today, and get an x-ray too. 2 days later. He was back in the same office. The doctor held papers in his hands, flipped through them slowly, looked, said nothing. And this silence turned out to be more frightening than any words. You need to get to an oncology center as soon as possible, he finally said. Excuse me. What? There's a growth here, and it's no longer small? He laughed, absurdly, loudly. Nope, this is a mistake. I'm tired. Nerves. The doctor didn't laugh. I understand you want to think that, but you asked, and I'm telling you the truth. He sat back down. Everything around him seemed to grow distant. Sounds became muffled. He could only hear his heart. Boom, 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 boom. But I still have a lot to do. I have a business trip next week. The doctor interrupted. If you don't start treatment now, you might not have that business trip, or much of anything else you've planned. He thought he had time, and the doctor had just canceled it. The road home was a blurred film. People were rushing, cars were honking. He walked slowly as if in a viscous dream. That evening a friend called. So, how are you? He wanted to say, everything's fine. But instead, they told me, I have cancer. Silence hung in the receiver. You're joking? I wish I were. That night he sat in the kitchen. The lamp buzzed. Tea grew cold. He couldn't find a single word for himself. Only the doctor's phrase echoed in his head. If you don't start treatment now. He took a notebook, opened to a blank page, wrote, I always thought tomorrow would be there. Put a period, stared at it for a long time, and understood. Tomorrow is just a word we repeat while we still have today. He thought he'd wake up in the morning, and it would all turn out to be a dream. But morning was just brighter. The heaviness remained. He picked up his phone, called the oncology center. Hello, good morning. They told me that I need to come see you. On the other end, a familiar, emotionless voice. Do you have a referral? Yes. Then come tomorrow at 10:15. And this tomorrow was no longer his. It belonged to doctors, tests, waiting rooms. That evening he tried to work, opened his email, wrote a couple of messages, but every word looked like nonsense. A colleague wrote, Can you make tomorrow's meeting? He stared at the message for a long time, then deleted his response and just shut his laptop. He didn't sleep that night, stared at the ceiling, listened to the clock counting seconds. Tick, tick, tick. Time was passing, and he just lay there. The next day at the oncology center, it smelled like bleach and something metallic. People in the hallway sat silently. Someone was reading. Someone was holding a loved one's hand. He sat alone, and for the first time felt not like a grown man, but like a lost boy. Appointment, examination, questions. How long have you been coughing? I don't remember. A month? 2? Did you smoke? Sometimes. Is the pain getting worse? Sometimes. The doctor nodded. We need to do a biopsy. Will it hurt? It's necessary. He came home with a bandage on his arm. Mom asked, So how did it go? He hugged her. Everything's fine. But his voice gave everything away. People lie when they're afraid the truth will crush their loved ones. He sat in the kitchen, looked out the window. The evening city lived its rhythm. Cars, lights, the laughter of passers-by. And inside him was the feeling that he'd fallen out of this rhythm, that he was already somewhere on the sidelines. On the third day, the results came. You have stage 3. He went quiet. We'll start chemo as soon as possible. Will I get better? We're going to fight, but we don't have as much time as we'd like. The word we sounded strange, because he realized the doctors would fight, and he hadn't even started yet. He left the office, sat on a bench by the entrance, took out his phone. In the feed, photos of friends, vacation, ocean, funny memes. And all of it seemed from another world, from a world he'd never returned to. That evening he went to the store, bought groceries, stood in line, listening to the woman in front of him complaining about high prices, and suddenly wanted to tell her, appreciate that you have time to argue about prices. But he stayed silent. Illness changes language. You stop talking about trivial things and start thinking about things you never even told yourself. He started chemotherapy. First day, bearable. Second, nausea. Third, weakness so severe that lifting a cup became an achievement. In the mirror was a different person, thinner, with gray eyes, with hair that was already starting to stay on the pillow. One day he sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. A friend called. "How are you?" "Fine. Hang in there. You're strong." "Uh-huh." He hung up and cried. Quietly. So no one would hear. This was the first night he admitted to himself, "I'm scared. I'm really scared." On the kitchen counter sat an unfinished cup of tea. Next to it, the notebook. He picked up a pen, wrote, "I always thought time heals, but time just passes. What heals is only what you do in that time." He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and for the first time through all of this, said out loud, "I don't want to die." After that night, he stopped lying to himself, stopped saying it's nothing, it'll pass on its own, later. He understood that later is a word for healthy people. Morning began quietly. He sat in the kitchen, drinking water in small sips, looked at his hands, the trembling had become familiar, and thought, how many of these mornings do I have left? He took out his phone. In his contacts, dozens of names, friends, acquaintances, relatives he hadn't spoken to in years. And suddenly it became clear. The most terrible thing is to die unnoticed. He selected one contact, pressed call. "Hi, it's me." A pause on the other end. "You're alive?" they asked, trying to be. He started calling those he'd never had time to call, not to say goodbye, but to say, "I remember, I value, I'm still here." Mom came that same evening. A bag of groceries, warm soup, and a thermos. "Are you at least eating?" "Trying to." She sat across from him, and for the first time he allowed himself to say, "I'm scared." She nodded. "Me too, but we'll get through this, together." In the evenings, he started going out on the street, without purpose, just to walk. Notice how the air smells, how branches crack underfoot, how yellow light glows in windows and someone in there is laughing. Before, he used to rush past. Now, he lingered. Illness makes the world slow down, and suddenly you see what you used to fly past. One day, he ducked into a bookstore, just like that, from the rain. It smelled like paper and coffee from a little cafe inside. He picked up a book she had once recommended, flipped through a couple of pages, and realized he still remembered how her voice sounded when she talked about it. He bought the book, not because he planned to read it, but because he wanted to preserve that sound inside. At the hospital, he started tolerating chemo a little better. Not physically, mentally, because he stopped fighting the very fact of treatment. "How are you feeling?" the nurse would ask, like a person who understood that living isn't tomorrow, it's now. One day the doctor said, "We have progress, but time is short." "How much?" The doctor sighed. "I don't like giving timelines, but we need to act fast." And this fast rang in his head like an alarm clock. He started writing a list. Not what to do before I die, but what to do while I'm alive. Tell Mom I love her. Every day. Call my brother. See the ocean. Finish the drawing I started in college. Give a book to someone who will understand. He stopped postponing conversations for later, stopped accumulating grudges, and stopped playing the silent game. One day he stopped by his neighbors, an elderly woman he used to greet by the elevator, brought her apples, just because. She smiled in such a way that he understood. Small, kind gestures are worth more than we think. That evening at home, he wrote in his notebook, "I was always afraid of wasting time on people, but it turned out that only people are worth my time." But there was another list, an invisible one, a list of things he wouldn't have time for anymore. And sometimes this list pressed him against the wall. On such evenings, he'd sit in the kitchen, turn off the lights, and listen to the night city. Out there, in the distance, someone was living, laughing, fighting, silent in rhythm with tea. And he just breathed. With each breath, understanding that he didn't know how many such breaths remained. In the mirror, he saw himself differently, not just sick, but as a person who finally wasn't lying to himself. He looked straight into the reflection's eyes and said, "If tomorrow comes, I'll live it. But today, I'm living." He had already learned to breathe with a tube in his vein, learned not to look at the drops in the IV, learned to say, "Everything's fine," even when he couldn't make it to the kitchen. But today was the day he'd been dreading. The doctor said, "We need to talk." The office was warm, but his hands were cold. The doctor laid x-rays on the table. "We've done everything possible. There are improvements, but small ones." A pause. "We'll continue fighting, but prepare for different outcomes." The words fell to the floor like metal objects, heavy, cold. He nodded. "I understand." Inside, there was no hysteria, just a quiet, live what's left. That same evening, he went to the ocean. Autumn. Empty beach. Waves beat dully against the shore. He sat on the cold sand, pulled his hat over his ears, and stared at the horizon line for a long time. Took out his phone, called his mom. "Mom." "Yes, son." "I love you." "I love you too. I just wanted you to know that. Every day." Then he called his friend. "Hey, remember how we wanted to go to the mountains?" "Of course. We're going tomorrow." "Are you serious?" "Very." He stopped waiting for the right moment, because he understood. The right moment is the one you didn't miss. At home, he took out his notebook, opened to the last page, wrote, "I thought time heals, but time just passes. What heals is what you do in that time." Closed it, put it on the table next to him, for Mom to find. That night, he couldn't sleep for a long time. Listened to leaves rustling outside the window. For the first time in a long while, he felt calm. He was no longer chasing eternity. He was simply living today. In his last days, he still went to treatments, joked with the nurses, photographed morning light on the windowsill, and every evening called someone he hadn't called in a long time, not to say goodbye, to live. One day the doctor asked, "What do you feel now?" He answered, "I feel like I'm living, even if it's not forever." The doctor smiled. That's what matters most. He stood on the balcony, looking at the city. A light breeze touched his hair. He breathed in deeply, as much as he could, and said quietly, "I still have time, and I won't give it away."